Everyone in this room was afraid of Damian Blackwood, until one waitress looked him in the eyes and refused to be ashamed. The words were never spoken aloud that night, but everyone who witnessed the moment would remember them. The Blackwood Estate restaurant was known as one of the most exclusive dining rooms in the city, a place where powerful people gathered beneath crystal lights and polished marble. On that evening, every conversation lowered when Damian Blackwood entered. He was the man whose name carried weight across the city. A ruthless Mafia Don with a reputation for control, precision, and an ice-cold personality that made even confident businessmen choose their words carefully. Damian did not need to raise his voice to command attention. His presence alone changed the atmosphere. Servers stood straighter. Guests avoided unnecessary eye contact. Everyone knew the rules when Damian was nearby. Never challenge him. Never question him. Never give him a reason to remember your name. Amara Johnson had never cared about those rules. Not because she was fearless, but because she had spent years learning that her dignity was something no one could take from her. At 27 years old, Amara worked as a waitress at the restaurant, saving every dollar she could while building a quiet life for herself. She was a curvy black woman in a world that often judged people before knowing their stories. She had heard the whispers. She had seen the disappointed looks. She knew exactly what some people thought when they saw her. Too ordinary. Too different. Too much. But Amara had survived enough to understand one important truth. Other people's opinions did not define her worth. That night, she approached Damian's table with calm professionalism. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood. I will be taking care of your table tonight." Damian looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. His eyes moved briefly over her uniform, her name tag, and the confidence in her posture. "Interesting choice," he said. Amara paused. "Excuse me." Damian leaned back in his chair. This restaurant usually understands the importance of image. The people nearby became silent. They knew exactly what was happening. Damian was testing her. Amara could have looked away. She could have apologized. She could have done what everyone else did around him. Instead, she simply picked up the menu and placed it on the table. A restaurant's image comes from how it treats people, not just how they look. For a moment, the entire room felt frozen. Damian had spent years watching people become nervous around him, but this woman did something unexpected. She answered him like he was just another person. A small smile appeared on his face, not because he was amused, but because he had found something rare. Someone who did not immediately bend under his reputation. "You are confident," Damian said. Amara met his gaze. "No, I just know who I am." Those 6 words stayed with him longer than he expected. Because behind his expensive suit, powerful name, and carefully built reputation, Damian Blackwood had spent years convincing the world that nothing could affect him. Yet a waitress he had underestimated had just shown him something he had forgotten existed. Strength did not always come from power. Sometimes, it came from standing tall when everyone expected you to fall. And for the first time in a very long time, Damian Blackwood was curious about someone he could not control. Damian Blackwood was not used to being ignored. For most of his life, people had learned to notice him before he entered a room, to measure their words carefully, and to hide their true thoughts behind polite smiles. But Amara Johnson was different. 3 days had passed since the night she stood across from him in the restaurant and answered his cold remark with calm confidence. 3 days since a waitress had done what powerful executives, politicians, and even longtime allies rarely dared to do. She had treated him like a person instead of a legend. Damian told himself he was not interested. He told himself she was simply unusual, nothing more. Yet somehow, his attention kept returning to the same question. Who was Amara Johnson when no one was watching? That question bothered him more than he wanted to admit. At the Blackwood headquarters, surrounded by luxury offices, expensive furniture, and people waiting for his approval, Damian found himself distracted by a woman who owned nothing close to his wealth, but carried something he could not buy: peace. Meanwhile, Amara continued her daily routine. She arrived at the restaurant before the morning rush, tied her apron, and prepared for another busy shift. She knew what happened that night had changed the way some employees looked at her. Some respected her. Others wondered if she had made a dangerous mistake by speaking honestly to Damian Blackwood. Amara did not regret it. She had spent too many years shrinking herself to make other people comfortable. She had learned that being kind did not mean allowing others to make her feel small. That afternoon, Damien returned to the restaurant unexpectedly. The staff immediately noticed. The room became quieter. Everyone expected Amara to become nervous, but she simply approached his table with the same professional expression she gave every guest. "Welcome back, Mr. Blackwood. Will you be dining alone today?" Damien looked at her for a moment. Most people would have avoided his eyes. Amara did not. "You are not afraid of me," he said. Amara placed the menu on the table. "Should I be?" The question caught him off guard. Not because it was disrespectful, but because it was honest. Damien studied her carefully. He had built his entire life around influence and control, yet this woman seemed completely unaffected by either. "Most people understand who I am," he said. Amara gave a small smile. "I know exactly who you are. I just do not think that is the only thing that matters." For a moment, Damien had no answer. Those words reached somewhere deeper than he expected. People always saw the name, the money, the reputation. Very few ever wondered about the man behind them. Amara walked away to serve another table, leaving Damien alone with a strange feeling he could not explain. It was not anger. It was not annoyance. It was something far more unfamiliar. Curiosity. Later that evening, Damien watched from a distance as Amara helped an elderly customer carry a bag to the door and patiently listened to a young employee who was having a difficult day. She treated everyone with the same respect, whether they could offer her anything in return or not. For the first time, Damien began to question something he had believed for years. Maybe strength was not about making people fear you. Maybe strength was about remaining kind in a world that constantly tried to make you cold. And that realization was far more unsettling than any challenge he had faced before. The world had always taught Amara Johnson one lesson. People often decide your value before they ever learn your name. She had experienced it in quiet glances, careless comments, and moments when strangers believed they understood her entire life from a single look. But what most people never saw was the strength it took to keep moving forward. Damien Blackwood was beginning to see that strength. After his unexpected visits to the restaurant became more frequent, the staff started noticing something unusual. The most feared man in the room was no longer interested only in business meetings and private conversations. He was paying attention to the people around him, especially Amara. Damien did not understand why. He had spent years believing emotions were distractions and kindness was a weakness. His world was built on loyalty, discipline, and control. Feelings had no place in it. Yet every time he saw Amara treat someone with patience, he found himself questioning the walls he had built around his own heart. One evening, after a long shift, Amara sat alone in the small break room behind the restaurant. She looked exhausted, but peaceful. She opened an old notebook where she wrote down her goals, dreams, and reminders to herself. She was not dreaming about luxury or fame. She simply wanted a life where she could wake up feeling proud of who she was. Damien happened to see the notebook when she left it behind on a nearby table. He did not read it. Instead, he noticed the worn cover and the small handwritten words on the front. "Keep becoming the person you needed when you were younger." Those words stayed with him, because Damien knew exactly what it meant to become someone different from who you once were. Years ago, before the expensive suits and powerful name, he had been a young man who trusted people too easily. Betrayal and disappointment had taught him to hide every emotion behind a cold expression. He convinced himself that caring less meant hurting less. But Amara represented everything he had pushed away: compassion, honesty, warmth. The next day, Damien surprised everyone when he quietly asked the restaurant manager about the staff. He wanted to know their names, their schedules, and their struggles. The manager was shocked. This was not the Damien Blackwood everyone knew. Meanwhile, Amara noticed the change but refused to assume anything. She had learned that actions mattered more than promises. "People can say anything," she told her coworker. "What matters is what they choose to do when nobody is watching." Damien overheard those words from across the room. For years, people had followed his orders because they feared disappointing him. But Amara measured people differently. She looked beyond reputation and power. She looked at choices. That night, Damien sat alone in his office overlooking the city lights. For the first time in years, he did not think about expanding his influence or protecting his image. He thought about a woman who had nothing to prove and no reason to impress him. A woman who had shown him that confidence was not about making others feel small. It was about knowing your own worth. And slowly, without realizing it, Damian Blackwood was beginning to wonder if the person who needed to change was not Amara at all, but himself. The rain had covered the city in a silver mist that evening, turning the streets outside Blackwood headquarters into a reflection of endless lights. Inside the towering building, Damian Blackwood sat behind his desk, surrounded by reports and business documents, yet his attention was nowhere near the numbers in front of him. His thoughts kept returning to the same person, Amara Johnson. He had met countless people who wanted something from him. They wanted his influence, his money, his protection, or the opportunities that came with his name. But Amara had never asked him for anything. She had challenged him, questioned him, and somehow made him think about parts of himself he had ignored for years. That was exactly what made her different. The following afternoon, Damian visited the restaurant again. The employees noticed immediately. The atmosphere changed the moment he walked through the door, but this time something felt different. He was not there for a business meeting. He was not there to impress anyone. He simply wanted to understand the woman who had disrupted his carefully controlled world. Amara approached his table with her usual calm expression. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blackwood." "The usual?" Damian looked surprised. "You remember?" She smiled slightly. "You have ordered the same meal every time you have come here." It was a simple observation, but Damian noticed something important. She paid attention to details because she cared, not because she wanted approval. Before he could respond, an older customer near the entrance accidentally dropped several papers while leaving the restaurant. Several people walked past without noticing. Amara immediately stepped away and helped gather them. She did not hesitate. She did not expect recognition. She simply helped because it was the right thing to do. Damian watched quietly. He had spent years surrounded by people who calculated every action based on what they could gain. Amara was different. Her kindness was not a performance. It was part of who she was. Later that evening, Damian found himself having a conversation he never expected. "Why do you do that?" he asked. Amara looked confused. "Do what?" "Help people who cannot give you anything in return." She thought for a moment before answering. "Because everyone deserves to feel seen." Those words stayed with him. Damian had built an empire where people noticed him everywhere he went, yet he could not remember the last time someone truly saw him. Not the name, not the reputation. Him. A few days later, Amara faced a difficult moment at work. A customer complained unfairly about her service, and although she remained professional, Damian noticed the disappointment in her eyes. He expected anger. He expected frustration. Instead, she simply took a breath and continued doing her job with the same dignity she always carried. That moment changed something inside him. For the first time, Damian understood that Amara's confidence did not come from being praised by others. It came from knowing her own value. That night, he stood near the window of his office, looking down at the city he controlled. He had spent years believing power meant never needing anyone. But Amara had shown him another kind of strength. The strength to care. The strength to be honest. The strength to remain gentle in a world that often rewarded coldness. And Damian Blackwood, a man who had always believed he could understand every situation, was finally facing something he could not control. He was beginning to change. The change in Damian Blackwood was subtle, but everyone around him could see it. The man who once walked through every room as if the world existed only to serve him had started noticing the people around him. His employees noticed. His business partners noticed. Even the people who had known him for years could not ignore that something had shifted. But the person who noticed the least was Amara Johnson. She was not trying to change him. She was not trying to impress him. She was simply living her life the way she always had, with patience, honesty, and a quiet confidence that came from accepting herself. One morning, Damian arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. The busy atmosphere was filled with the sounds of customers, conversations, and the movement of the staff preparing for the day. Amara was carrying several plates to a table when she saw him. "You are here early," she said. Damian looked at the clock. "Is that unusual?" Amara smiled. For someone who always seems to have 1,000 things happening at once, yes. It was a simple comment, but Damian appreciated that she spoke to him naturally. She did not treat him like a powerful figure who needed special attention. She treated him like Damian. As the day continued, Damian watched her interact with everyone around her. She remembered customers' preferences. She encouraged new employees when they made mistakes. She made people feel comfortable without expecting anything in return. It was a quality he rarely saw in his own world. Later that afternoon, Damien found Amara organizing supplies in the storage room. "You work harder than anyone here," he said. Amara turned around, surprised by the compliment. "Everyone here works hard." Damien paused. "Most people would take the credit." She shrugged. "Helping each other is more important than getting credit." Those words stayed with him. Damien had spent years surrounded by people competing for recognition. In his world, trust was rare and kindness often came with conditions. But Amara offered kindness without keeping score. That evening, Damien invited her to sit for a few minutes after her shift ended. It was not a business conversation. It was not a demand. It was simply a conversation between two people. He asked about her dreams, and for the first time in a long while, he listened without interrupting. Amara told him that she wanted to open a small community restaurant one day, a place where everyone felt welcome. Damien found the idea surprising. Many people would dream of wealth or status if they had the chance. Amara dreamed of creating a place where others felt valued. "You really believe people can change?" Damien said. Amara looked at him carefully. "I believe people can choose what kind of person they want to become." Damien looked away for a moment. Those words touched something he had tried to ignore. He had spent years believing his past had already decided his future. He believed becoming colder was the only way to survive. But Amara saw something different. She saw that a person was not defined only by their mistakes. They were defined by the choices they made afterward. For the first time, Damien wondered if he could become someone better. Not because someone forced him to. Not because he needed approval. But because he wanted to. And that realization was the beginning of a journey he never expected to take. Damien Blackwood had spent years believing that every weakness came from caring too much. In his world, emotions created problems, trust created risks, and attachment created something others could use against him. That was why he built a life where nothing surprised him anymore. But Amara Johnson had become the one person he could not predict. She never tried to impress him. She never asked about his wealth or his influence. She simply looked at him and saw a person, not a name. And that was something Damien had almost forgotten how to be. Over the following weeks, their conversations became a quiet part of his routine. He still handled business meetings, managed his company, and carried the responsibilities that came with his position, but there was a difference now. He found himself looking forward to the simple moments when he could sit across from Amara and hear her thoughts about the world. One evening, after the restaurant closed, Amara noticed Damien standing near the entrance. "You are still here?" she asked. Damien nodded. "I was waiting." She raised an eyebrow. "For what?" He hesitated. That small hesitation surprised him more than anyone else. Damien Blackwood was a man known for making decisions quickly. Yet with Amara, he found himself choosing his words carefully. "I wanted to ask you something." Amara crossed her arms playfully. "That sounds serious." Damien looked around the quiet restaurant. "Why did you not hate me after the way I spoke to you when we first met?" The question carried more honesty than she expected. Amara became quiet for a moment. She remembered that night clearly. She remembered the embarrassment, the judgment, and the feeling of being treated as though she was not enough. But she also remembered something else. She remembered that Damien seemed less like a powerful man and more like someone who had forgotten how to connect with others. "Because I knew your words came from somewhere," she said. "People who are truly happy with themselves usually do not need to make others feel small." Damien looked at her, unable to respond. No one had ever explained him that way. Most people either feared him or tried to please him. Very few people try to understand him. Amara continued, "That does not mean what you said was acceptable. But I do not believe one bad moment has to define an entire person." Those words affected him more than he wanted to admit. Because deep down, Damien had spent years believing he was trapped by the choices he had made and the person he had become. He had forgotten that change was possible. The next day, Damien made a decision. He returned to the restaurant and quietly spoke with the manager. He asked about ways to improve the workplace, support the employees, and create better opportunities for the people who worked there. He did not announce it. He did not seek attention. He simply did it. When Amara found out, she looked at him carefully. "You are changing," she said. Damien gave a small smile. "Maybe I am learning." For a man who once believed he had every answer, those words were difficult to say. But they were honest. And honesty was something Amara had always valued. As days passed, Damien realized something important. Amara had never tried to break down his walls. She had simply shown him that he did not need to hide behind them forever. The person everyone feared was slowly becoming someone who could care, someone who could listen, and someone who finally understood that real strength was not about controlling everything around him. It was about having the courage to become better than he was yesterday. For the first time in many years, Damian Blackwood felt uncertain about what came next. He had built his entire life around being prepared. Every decision was calculated. Every possibility was considered. Every challenge had a solution. But Amara Johnson had introduced something into his world that could not be measured or controlled. She had shown him that becoming a better person was not about changing how others saw him. It was about changing how he saw himself. However, not everyone around Damian welcomed that change. Some people who had worked with him for years believed his softer attitude was a sign that he was losing control. They did not understand that the man they had known before was not the only version of Damian Blackwood that existed. One afternoon, Damian attended a major business gathering where several important figures discussed the future of their companies. Normally, he would have entered the room with the same cold confidence everyone expected. But this time, he carried himself differently. He listened more. He considered different opinions. He treated people with respect instead of simply expecting obedience. After the meeting ended, one of his longtime associates approached him. "You seem different lately," the man said. Damian remained calm. "Maybe I finally realized that being respected is not the same as being feared." The words surprised even Damian himself, because they were something he would never have admitted before. Later that evening, Damian visited the restaurant where Amara worked. He found her organizing the next day's schedule with the same dedication she always showed. When she noticed him, she smiled. "You look like someone who has a lot on his mind." Damian looked around the familiar place. It was simple compared to the luxury spaces he usually occupied, yet somehow it felt more genuine. "I have spent a long time thinking that strength meant never needing anyone," he said. Amara listened quietly. "And now?" she asked. Damian looked at her. "Now I think strength might mean knowing when someone has helped you become better." Amara did not respond immediately. She understood that those words were not easy for him to say. Damian was not a man who apologized with speeches or made promises without meaning them. Every small change from him required a level of honesty that he had avoided for years. But before they could continue their conversation, Damian received an important message. A business situation required his attention, and the pressure of his old world was quickly returning. Amara noticed the change in his expression. "You do not have to become the person you were before just because things become difficult," she said. Damian looked at her, remembering the man he used to be. The man who believed kindness was weakness and trust was a mistake. For years, he had protected himself by keeping everyone at a distance. But Amara had shown him that isolation was not the same as strength. As he left the restaurant that night, Damian realized something important. He was not changing because someone demanded it. He was changing because, for the first time, he wanted a different future. A future where he could keep his success without losing his humanity. And the woman who had once been a stranger was now the person who reminded him of the man he truly wanted to become. The city had always known Damian Blackwood as a man who never looked back. Every decision he made was final. Every mistake was something he buried beneath success and responsibility. But now, standing in the quiet restaurant where his entire perspective had changed, Damian realized there was one thing he could no longer ignore. The person he had underestimated was the person who had helped him understand himself. Amara Johnson had never tried to fix him. She had never demanded that he become someone else. She simply showed him that he had a choice. The choice to remain behind the walls he built or to become someone who could finally connect with others. That realization became even more important when Damian faced a difficult moment in his business world. Several people around him expected him to return to the cold and distant person they knew. They believed kindness was temporary and that eventually he would go back to his old ways. Damian understood why they thought that. For years, he had given them no reason to believe otherwise. But this time was different. He did not want to prove them wrong with words. He wanted to prove it through his actions. The following day, Damian visited the restaurant during the afternoon shift. Amara noticed immediately that something was different. He seemed quieter, more thoughtful. "You look like you have been carrying a heavy thought all day," she said. Damian smiled slightly. "Maybe I have." They sat for a few minutes after her shift, and for once, Damian allowed himself to be honest without hiding behind his reputation. "I spent years believing that if people respected me, I would never have to worry about being hurt," he said. Amara listened carefully. Did it work? She asked gently. Damien looked down for a moment. No. That simple answer carried more meaning than any long explanation. Amara understood that admitting the truth was not easy for him. The man sitting in front of her was someone who had spent years appearing unshakable. Yet now he was learning that being open did not make him weak. It made him human. You know, Amara said, the strongest people are not the ones who never struggle. They are the ones who are willing to grow. Damien remembered the first night they met. He remembered how quickly he had judged her, how easily he believed he understood her without knowing her story. He had been wrong. Completely wrong. Amara had shown him that confidence was not about having everyone admire you. It was about respecting yourself even when others did not. Later that evening, Damien made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He began changing the way he treated the people who worked with him. He listened before making decisions. He showed appreciation instead of only expecting results. He started building relationships based on trust instead of fear. Amara watched those changes quietly. She knew real transformation did not happen overnight. It happened through small choices repeated every day. And Damien was finally making those choices. For the first time in his life, Damien Blackwood was not trying to become more powerful. He was trying to become better. And the woman who once stood across from him as a stranger had become the person who reminded him that the greatest victory was not controlling the world around him. It was finally understanding himself. Months had passed since the night Damien Blackwood realized that changing himself was the greatest decision he had ever made. The city still knew his name. People still respected his position and the influence he carried. But those who worked closest with him noticed something different. The cold distance that once surrounded him was gone. In its place was a man who listened, who cared, and who finally understood that success meant very little if there was no one to share it with. Amara Johnson continued building the life she had always dreamed of. Her small plans had grown into something bigger, and with Damien's support, she began creating a place where people from every background could feel welcomed and valued. It was not about luxury or appearances. It was about kindness, community, and making people feel seen. One evening, Damien visited the restaurant after a long day. He stood quietly near the entrance, watching Amara greet customers with the same warmth she had shown since the first day they met. He remembered how differently he had seen her back then. He had judged her without knowing her story. He had believed confidence came from status and appearance. But Amara had taught him that true confidence came from knowing your worth, even when others failed to recognize it. When she noticed him, she smiled. "You are thinking too much again," she said. Damien laughed softly. It was a sound very few people had ever heard from him. "Maybe I am." They walked through the restaurant together, looking at the changes they had created. For Damien, it represented something more than a business achievement. It represented the person he had become. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Amara asked. Damien nodded. "I remember. You were not exactly kind." He looked down, a little embarrassed by the memory. "I know." For years, Damien had been proud of never admitting when he was wrong. But now, he understood that an apology was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign of growth. "I spent a long time thinking I understood everything," he said. "I thought people could be measured by what they had, how they looked, or what they could offer. I was wrong." Amara listened quietly. Damien continued. "You showed me that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought. Respect, trust, a genuine connection. Those words meant more because they came from someone who had once believed he did not need any of those things." Amara smiled. "Everyone has the chance to become better." Damien looked at her and realized that was the lesson he would carry forever. The woman who had once been overlooked by others had become the person who changed the way he saw the entire world. She did not change because someone finally recognized her value. She had always known it. Instead, she changed him by reminding him that people were more than their reputation, their mistakes, or the opinions of others. Years later, when people spoke about Damien Blackwood, they no longer only talked about his success. They talked about his transformation. They talked about the man who learned that real strength was not about standing above everyone else. It was about standing beside the person who helped you become who you were meant to be. And beside him was Amara Johnson, the woman who never needed power to make an impact. She simply showed him that the greatest victories in life were not about controlling everything around you. They were about finding someone who helped you become the best version of yourself.